Rain hammers the blackout tar, and the street holds its breath. A bomb has burrowed into the clay beneath a tenement house and has not detonated. The sirens fade, the fires crackle 2 blocks away, and a single cellar becomes the center of London. Men in heavy coats seal the cordon, neighbors file out with blankets over their heads, and the clock begins to count a very long day. 36 hours of nerves. 36 hours to outlast a machine that was built to kill by delay and by surprise. At first light, the team from the Royal Engineers steps down the broken stairs with care. They know the type. A German high-explosive SC-1000, widely called Hermann for its size and for its blunt force. The bomb has torn through brick and joists, come to rest at an angle, and pressed earth into the collar. The air smells of dust, coal, and damp timber. An air raid precautions warden passes on the civilian list for evacuation, then waits on the pavement, listening to floorboards creak that he cannot see. The sapper corporal sets the plan in plain steps. Identify, secure, expose, render safe, remove. No step is quick. The cellar is shored with timber cribs and angled struts. Every lift of a jack forces the team to pause and listen. Old gas pipes are capped. Electric lines are traced and cut. A medic lays out stretchers at the top of the stairs and says nothing. The bomb is large enough to remove the building and those standing near it. By midday, the nose and a section of the casing are clear. A stethoscope test suggests the clockwork is quiet, but that proves little. German armorers used multiple fuses, sometimes a clockwork delay, sometimes an anti-disturbance device that wakes when moved, sometimes a chemical time element that eats through a membrane hours or days after impact. The safe move is to reach the fuse pocket without turning the body and then work by hand. A veteran sapper who cut his teeth in the autumn raids kneels at the shoulder of the corporal. He remembers a job in Poplar where the delay ran out as they lifted, a low click that became a roar. He remembers the color of dust in his mouth and the sense of floating. He works now with that memory as a guardrail, not a chain. Night brings a new storm. Pumps keep the waterline down. Chalk marks on the casing record each stage. The corporal refuses hurry. Once, the cellar shuddered when a landmine fell in the docks, and he made the call to withdraw, then return. That caution buys a margin by dawn. Hour 29. The fuse pocket is reached. A sleeve spanner engages. A slow turn. Another pause. The anti-handling device is there, but it has not armed cleanly. The team holds still and breathes. The fuse comes free like a tooth that finally yields. It goes to a sand bucket. A second pocket is opened and cleared. Only then does the tension lift from backs and jaws. The lift is its own operation. A cradle of webbing and a chain hoist take the load. The body rises past scarred brick and out into a lorry bed lined with sandbags. Civilians watch from corners at a distance, faces pale and relieved. The convoy moves to the open land at the edge of the city where disposal pits wait. A controlled demolition sends a flat shock into the soil. The street unfreezes. Families cross the cordon, keys rattle, kettles boil on coal grates. The team signs the log with the time and the type and the method. London counts another unexploded bomb made safe. Another day when craft and patience outran a device built to make patience fatal. Sirens rise over London like a blade drawn in the dark, and every window answers with a heartbeat. Searchlights rake the low clouds. The first incendiaries clatter across rooftops, and the night turns metallic. Then the bomber stream arrives in waves, engines drumming a steady verdict. Fire takes the docks and reaches inland, a red river threading streets that were quiet an hour ago. Air raid posts report in by the minute. One message cuts through the static. Large, unexploded bomb suspected near a tenement. Possible heavy type. Basement level. The wardens clear the block as sparks drift down like hot snow. Families file past with blankets and cats in baskets, faces chalked with dust. Fire crews knock incendiaries from gutters with shovels and sand. A warden remembers the smell of wet plaster and petrol, the way the street seemed to breathe between the pulses of the barrage. In the doorway, the sapper officer arrives with his team. They have been on rotation for days and carry the particular stillness of men who move only when it matters. The crater in the yard points toward the cellar. Plaster cracks map the wall. A dull note in the concrete answers each careful footstep. They find the bomb nose deep, a fat shape wedged among coal sacks and timber. SC-1000, the sappers reckon, the Hermann that breaks buildings by weight as much as blast. It is warm to the touch and ticking is not expected, yet never fully dismissed. The team begins to strip the space. Gas line isolated. Beams propped. A chalk mark on the floor for the stretcher path. The officer speaks quietly, and the men pass tools hand to hand. Stethoscope. Spanners. Wooden wedges. The blitz does not pause. Up the street, a church window shears out in a breath, and the bell rings once and is done. The sappers log the time, the conditions, the suspected fuse with its tricks of delay and anti-handling. They have seen bombs wake after hours and punish anyone who grew confident. So they work as if the next second is both safe and fatal. An ARP messenger runs updates from the post. Bus is diverted. Water mains holding. A mother wants to know when she can fetch the photograph left on the mantle. The warden tells her not tonight, and later will be another word for luck. In the cellar, a jack bites, and the bomb eases a hand width. Cold dust rises, sweet and sour. A sapper remembers how the dust stayed in his hair for days, and how the silence in the moment before a tool touched steel felt louder than any siren. By midnight, the lift is ready. Block and tackle fixed to a beam that complains but holds. The team breathe together, and the mass begins to move along the planned path, over cribbing that creaks like a ship at sea. Outside, a lorry waits with a box cradle and a tarpaulin. The city glows along the river bends, fires linked like a chain. The officer signs the ledger. Render safe in progress. Route to disposal site cleared. Dawn lays a thin light on broken cornices and glazed cobbles. The lorry pulls away, slow and deliberate, while wardens let the cordon breathe. People step back into lives that have not ended. In the logbook, the numbers will show another night measured and survived. For the sappers, the measure is simpler. One heavy bomb left the cellar and did not take the street with it. Sirens fade, and the street listens to its own silence. A wall groans, dust hangs like fog, and a single helmeted figure steps into the doorway light of a shattered shop. He is an ARP warden with a clipboard and a whistle, and he has one job before anything else happens. He must buy time. Somewhere under the paving there is a buried steel cylinder with a mind of its own. Every minute that passes may be 1 minute too many. First priority is the cordon. The warden plants his lamp at the junction, posts 2 volunteers, and stretches a rope across the tram lines. He marks the danger house in chalk and then walks the rectangle of probable fragments, counting paces, memorizing alley mouths and windows that look inward. People drift back to thresholds, curious and shaking. The warden keeps them moving with calm orders. He knows that panic makes noise and noise makes mistakes. He does not touch the crater. That is for the men in khaki who carry tools in silence. His task is to create a safe void where they can work. Evacuation begins with the most fragile. One neighbor cannot walk more than a dozen yards without rest. 2 fire watchers form a chair with their arms and carry him to the corner. A mother refuses to leave her bedroom because the pram is wedged under the staircase. The warden and an ambulance driver lift the splintered frame free and wheel it out, a tiny handbell tied to the handle so they can find it in darkness. In the basement, an elderly couple sit beside a cold range with their wills on the table. The warden folds the papers, pockets them for safekeeping, and leads them to the rest center 2 streets away. Time matters, and so does distance. The warden uses a map with grease pencil circles to push the cordon outward to a radius that matches last month's worst blast. He checks gas mains and orders the electric cut. He sends runners to the ward post for more blankets and to the school hall to prepare tea and cots. He notes the hour of impact, the soil type, the depth of the crater, and passes the details to control. He has learned these habits from long nights and drizzly dawns when the bomb disposal lorry does not arrive for hours. Memories from wardens across East and South London tell the same rhythm. A dull thump without flame. The ground breathing. The quiet afterwards heavier than the siren. A constable and 2 wardens holding a line against a tide of residents who want to fetch a photo album or a cat. A stretcher party returning from the rest center with hot bricks wrapped in towels for those who refuse to leave. A boy with soot on his face offering to guide the sappers through a coal chute. The last minutes before the engineers arrive are the hardest. The street is empty but still alive with small sounds. Plaster settling. A clock somewhere that refuses to stop. The warden walks the cordon again, touches shoulders, looks people in the eye, and tells them what will happen next. Men in steel helmets will go in. They will listen. They will uncover the fuse and decide. Until then, no one crosses the rope. Counting the minutes is not fear. It is discipline, and on nights like this, discipline saves a street. The cellar is silent until the plaster dust starts to fall like ash. A dull oval shape sleeps in the earth beyond a cracked brick wall, and everyone upstairs is already gone. The street is taped off. The clock has been running since the all clear, and the sapper who crawls forward knows that the enemy still ticks under his hands. First task is to learn its name. The casing is smooth and fat, over 1.5 meters long, steel scuffed by rubble. The tail fins are torn, but the body is intact. He measures the diameter with a battered tape. 46 centimeters. Weight near 1 metric ton. This is an SC-1000. The crews call it Hermann for a reason. High explosive filling is Amatol or Triolin, depending on the batch. The cellar smells of damp lime, cordite ghosts, and fear. He brushes soil from the nose ring and the fuse pocket. German bombs of this class were often set with clockwork time delays. Fuse 17 and its variations were common in the Blitz. The trick is that the clock can be running invisibly, ready to complete a circuit long after the raid. He lays a hand on the metal and tests for warmth or vibration. Nothing obvious. That means nothing. He places a stethoscope against the nose and listens in bursts, moving around the circumference, marking chalk arcs on the casing where the noise seems strongest. Sometimes it is a faint insect scrape. Sometimes it is silence that lies. There is another danger. Anti-handling devices were fitted to punish curiosity and bravery. A small secondary unit could sit under the main fuse, a booby trap that triggers if the primary is disturbed or unscrewed. The British manuals say expect a Zusatz 40, a simple but merciless block. The sapper remembers a sergeant's voice from instruction days, a man who lost 2 fingers to a careless quarter turn. Take time, then take more time. If you think it is safe, think again. He builds the arena for work. Timber struts shore the ceiling. Sandbags form a horseshoe to catch fragments. A mirror on a stick peers into shadows where hands should not go. He chalks render-safe procedure across his notebook. Probe the fuse cavity. Identify pattern and thread. Determine whether the clock can be stopped with a magnetic breaker or if flooding with wax is required. Prepare a puller that will not jar the striker. Every step turns breath into stone. Voices of others carry into his head while he works. An ARP warden saying that the street slept in the church hall, and an old man refused to leave his budgie. A young sapper from an earlier job, amazed that a ton of steel can smell sweet when the filling sweats. A housewife pressing tea into his hand at dawn, shaking too much to drink herself. Memory becomes another tool on the blanket. He rechecks the stethoscope. There it is. A faint tick, not electrical, more like a wound-up toy losing heart. Fuse 17 with a running delay would be too dangerous to withdraw. He marks the angle and aligns the fuse wrench. The choice is to hold the clock or to let it run out. 36 hours have passed since impact. The calculations say the spring is almost spent. He wedges, waits, listens again. The tick fades to nothing. Only then does he commit. 1 degree. Another. He keeps tension smooth, sweat tracking grit from his temples into his eyes. When the fuse finally turns free, the room does not change. No triumph, no music. Just a rectangle of sky, and the coal chute seems a shade brighter. The bomb is still a beast, only sleeping deeper. It will be hoisted into a lorry at midnight, driven to a sand pit on the edge of the city, and broken by controlled fire into a tremor that no one will hear because the sirens are already wailing again. The sapper writes the serial numbers and the time in his log. He notes SC-1000 confirmed, fuse 17 rendered safe, no anti-handling found, cellar shored, structure stable. Then he rubs the chalk arcs from the skin of the bomb with the back of his glove, as if erasing fingerprints from a crime that London refuses to let become ordinary. You feel it before you hear it. A slow metallic click somewhere under your boots, a rhythm that does not belong to a living room. The air smells of dust and coal gas. Above, a tenement stripped by blast leans on temporary timbers. Below, in a half-flooded cellar, rests the reason an entire street is silent. An SC-1000 Hermann, dull gray, scabbed with plaster, 2 fuse pockets cratered with shrapnel. The clock inside is still alive. The Blitz has made time a weapon. German armorers have given the bomb more than mass and speed. They have given it patience. Clockwork delay fuses Type 17 and 17B hide inside the casing, wound to hold for hours or even days, built to wait until rescuers return. Some carry an extra trick, the anti-handling device, ZUS-40 screwed onto the back of the main fuse, ready to arm the moment a spanner moves the wrong way. To the sapper kneeling in the grit, this is not steel and springs. This is a duel with an unseen watchmaker. The routine begins because routine is the only shield. Air raid precautions wardens have cleared the block, chalked doorways with house numbers and head counts. A Royal Engineers section sets the perimeter. The officer studies the nose pocket. If the striker sheared and the fuse cavity is intact, there is a chance. If the cavity is bowed or packed with concrete, there may be a second fuse in the tail, hidden beyond reach. A carpenter team shores the joists. When a wall twitches, everyone freezes and listens for the click. Veterans remembered the sound like a small animal trapped in a tin. A sergeant from a 1940 London squad recorded a pattern on scrap paper, counting intervals to judge whether the mechanism was running down or sticking. Another man in the team, a former watchmaker, held a stethoscope against the casing and traced the beat. If it faltered and returned, they assumed a Type 17 with a pendulum governor still catching. If the beat was steady and dry, the spring might be strong and the delay long. No one trusted a still bomb. Render safe procedure is careful violence. Fuse tunnels are brushed clean. A splash of graphite cuts the friction that would telegraph touch into movement. A wrench is set, rarely directly on the fuse, often on an extractor made in a backstreet shop the night before. The officer calls the steps aloud for the scribe to record. Mark the orientation. Mark the quarter turn. If a ZUS-40 is present, plan for it to wake. If the fuse refuses, plan to lift the entire weapon with a cradle, lorry it out past blackout lamps, and bury it in a remote pit for a controlled shot. Hours pass. London breathes in fire and sleeps and wakes again. The street remains empty. Tea is brewed on a brazier. The cellar stinks of wet timber. A hand returns to the wrench. A quarter turn becomes a half. The beat changes. The team does not celebrate. A fuse comes free, heavy and oily and cold. It goes into a sandbag, then into a steel chest. The bomb is now a cylinder of amytal that will not choose when to kill. Statistics later will talk about percentages, about average times to neutralize, about the number of unexploded bombs that haunted each month of the Blitz. The men in the cellar work to a different arithmetic. One street back. One family home opened. One clock stopped. The unseen watchmaker loses the duel, and London keeps time of its own. The bomb has not gone off, and time is already running out. 1,000 kilograms of high explosive has punched through brick and chalk, lodging under a tenement in the East End. Smoke still threads the stairwell. The street is silent except for the thud of boots and the distant cough of pumps at the docks. Residents are herded past sandbag walls. Below, the cellar groans. If the bomb moves, the house will follow. The first men into the dark are an ARP warden and a sapper corporal. Their lamps pick out sagging joists, cracked mortar, a drift of coal dust that trickles like an hourglass. The blast hole is a raw mouth in the floor. The corporal speaks into a notebook and touches the wall with gloved fingers, counting heartbeats to feel fresh vibrations from traffic above. He orders the street closed. One lorry remains, stacked with timber, wedges, bottle jacks, and coils of rope, shoring before fuse work. That is the rule that keeps men alive. They lay out timbers by size and purpose. Sole plates go down first to spread the load on churned earth. 2 men saw and 2 men carry. The cellar smell is lime and damp canvas. A lance corporal builds a box crib, criss-cross courses of heavy timber, each layer tight with oak wedges. Struts cut to length are driven between sole plate and joist, their ends scribed for a perfect fit. A steel needle beam slides beneath a beam with its heart split. The jack takes the weight with a slow creak, then another quarter turn, then stop. Never hurry a groaning house. A veteran of the first winter of the Blitz once wrote that the worst sound was the scrape of grit when a wedge settled under load. He described the way breath fogged inside the respirator and how the cellar air tasted of soot. Another sapper remembered the order of work as a rhythm learned by fear. Measure, cut, present, wedge, jack, bind. A final bind with rope makes a belt across the beam to restrain split ends. The corporal checks each bearing with the blade of his knife. No gap, no shine. A runner brings word from the bomb disposal officer. The munition is likely an SC-1000, called a Hermann in the streets, the big thin case type that burrows before it rests. If the fuse is a clockwork delay, time is the enemy. If it is an anti-handling type, haste is a trap. The shoring must make the cellar safe enough for a man to lie down and work in the hole with both hands steady. They raise the floor on stilts. Short shore pairs brace the party wall. Rakers bite into the footing at 45 degrees, their heels spiked, their heads notched to the wall plate. Every strut is stamped and chalked. When a joist lifts and the crack narrows, the corporal calls hold. A chalk line is struck across the fissure to reveal any fresh movement. The ARP warden above knocks once for clear, twice for stop, his signals muffled by the heap of sandbags on the landing. Dust presses down. The lorry's headlights are masked, the cellar lit by a shaded lantern hung low to avoid shadows. They lay a crawl board to the mouth of the crater. The corporal kneels, listens, and takes one last look around the forest of timber that was not there this morning. The cellar stands on stilts now, a skeleton holding a wounded house. Only then does he give the quiet order that begins the next phase. Fetch the tools for the fuse. The timbers answer with silence, and silence is permission to proceed. The street is silent except for the slow drip of broken pipes and the soft hiss of settling dust. A lorry idles at the corner with its lamps hooded. In the basement of a leaning tenement, 3 men in steel helmets kneel around a fat black cylinder half buried in bricks. It is an unexploded German bomb from the Blitz winter, an SC-1000 that Londoners call Hermann. The clock in it may be running. The cellar smells of wet plaster, singed timber, and cordite. Every breath feels borrowed. First they build a cocoon. Silk sandbags pass hand to hand down the stairs, light and pliable enough to press into the awkward voids around the casing. Silk does not spark on steel, and it folds tight like skin. They stack the bags into a low wall, packing them with steady palms to dampen fragments if the worst happens. Overhead, timber struts bear the weight of the cracked floor. The sapper corporal checks the shoring wedges once more. He knows falling debris can kill a squad as surely as a detonator. Tools are laid out on a ground sheet. Adjustable spanners, screwdrivers, a soft brush, chalk, a torch with a hooded lens, and the battered stethoscope that every team trusts like a relic. The officer kneels and places the stethoscope on the bomb body where the fuse pocket should be. He closes his eyes and listens. Veteran diaries speak of the sound as a small animal inside metal, sometimes fast, sometimes dragging, sometimes silent until a floorboard creaks and it begins again. Tonight there is only the hum of the city through brick. They mark the casing with chalk. 1 line for the nose, 1 for the suspected fuse position, careful notes for thread direction. German fuses vary. Type 17 and its kin use clockwork delay. Type 50 can carry anti-handling tricks. A Zoo's 40 gremlin may punish the first careless turn. They take nothing on faith. The corporal brushes dust from the fuse well and notes scarring that hints at heat from the raid. Heat can distort threads. A stuck fuse can mean a death sentence. The officer calls for silence. He seats the stethoscope again while the corporal steadies the lamp. No tick, no whir, only the soft rasp of breath through a respirator hanging at a chest. If the clock has run down, they may attempt removal. If it is only sleeping, a touch can wake it. A sapper later wrote that the hardest thing was choosing to begin. His hands obeyed only after he counted his breaths. Spanners meet metal. Pressure is firm, but not sudden. Quarter turn. Pause. Listen. Another quarter. The nose threads complain, then yield. When the ring loosens, the corporal slides silk sandbags under the tool and under his wrist to cushion any slip. He eases the fuse free and cups it into a padded tin. The moment is not triumph. It is a thin ridge between 2 valleys. They search again for a secondary device. The brush finds nothing but dust and flaking paint. Above them, an ARP warden shifts on the curb and checks his watch. 36 hours have passed since the call. Families in 2 streets wait in borrowed rooms. A constable dozes against a doorway. When the team emerges, there is no cheer. There is only the slow release of lungs and the scrape of boots on wet stone. The bomb body rides a lorry under a tarpaulin for its last journey to the range. Later, in a notebook gone soft at the edges, someone records the facts. Location, depth, fuse type, time to render safe, number of sandbags used. The tally is dry. The memory is not. Veterans speak of the weight of the stethoscope on bone, the way silk felt warm in cold hands, the sound of a spanner biting home. They recall that courage did not roar. It whispered. It moved with careful fingers in the dark, one breath, one turn, one heartbeat at a time. The siren had been silent for hours when the cellar began to tick. In the narrow light of a shaded torch, dust drifted like ash, and every footfall sent plaster from the joists. A tenement in East London, winter of 1941, and somewhere under the floorboards lay a deep buried heavyweight that had punched through brick and clay without exploding. The street above was cordoned by ARP wardens, buses diverted, neighbors queued with blankets and bundles, and the wardens logged each minute as if time itself might decide the outcome. A sapper diary from a Royal Engineers bomb disposal section describes the first look. A narrow hole, timber props, air heavy with damp coal smell. A hand on the joist to feel for vibration, a cheek pressed to the floor to taste the thrum of machinery inside the casing. The team worked in whispers and hand signals. One man lifted floorboards, one slid a sandbag under each, one passed tools wrapped in sacking so metal would not scrape metal. They had done this before, and still the stomach tightened when the mechanism chattered. The ERP post recorded arrivals at 0210 hours. Gas mains marked, electricity isolated, residents moved to a church hall 2 streets away. The log notes a mother asking about a pram she had left behind, and a warden promising to fetch it after all clear. In the hall, a warden led a prayer while tea sputtered from a dented urn. Outside, rain began to stream off the eaves and seep down the close boarded stairs to the cellar where the men worked on their knees. The sapper in charge examined the tail unit. Paint scraped, stencils blurred by moisture. He read the fittings by touch. Delay fuse suspected. Anti-handling device possible. The chalk on the beam carried the plan in 2 words: render safe. They cribbed the ceiling with balks, built a wooden cage around the exposed section, and packed silk sandbags like pillows to absorb shock. Stethoscope to the skin of the bomb, stopwatch counting cycles that did not settle into any gentle rhythm. Hours lengthened. The ticking slowed, stopped, then stuttered again. A veteran later wrote that the silence was worse than the noise because it invited hope, and hope could make your hands clumsy. He had learned to breathe in sets of 4 and to move only on the exhale. When the tools came out, they were ungainly and plain. Spanners, a small hammer, a key that fit only if you believed it would. The team leader ordered a pause, then a withdrawal, then a return, each movement written into the ARP ledger with times that now read like a heart monitor. Neighbors at the cordon whispered as dawn met a low cloud ceiling. Church bells carried through the drizzle. A warden went door to door to remind families not to light fires because sparks might find the dust that held the street together. In the cellar, the sapper scratched a final line of chalk and eased the first component free. No cheer rose. Only a nod, a breath he had kept for an hour, and the steadying of the timber frame. By late afternoon, they had the core secured. The lift came slow, block and tackle creaking, sand hissing back into the pit. The ARP entry marked the time that traffic resumed with a single word: open. The sapper diary ended that day with a sentence about wet socks and a cup of tea in the back of the lorry. Later statistics would count the failures, the hours, the near misses, but the voices from that street tell the measure better. A team that moved like a single body. A ledger that counted hope as much as minutes. A neighborhood that held its breath together until the cellar gave it back. The street is silent, but for a thin metallic heartbeat from the cellar. Brick dust hangs in the air like fog. A blackboard sign still leans outside the shuttered grocer. Today's ration specials untouched. Beneath the pavement, 1,000 kilograms of steel and amytal wait for a mistake. The sapper wipes grit from his hands, breathes slow, and marks the first white line on the bomb casing. Render safe begins with mapping the enemy. Chalk strokes record fuse pockets, transit scratches, lifting lugs, fragments of nose cone. The team notes the tail orientation and the angle of entry through the joists. A carpenter squad has already cribbed the ceiling with thick timber A-frames, wedges singing under the blows. Each minute the house ticks and settles. In the corner, the ARP log shows the hour of impact, the building numbers evacuated, the nearest tram line cut. They work by dim hooded lamps to keep the street in darkness. Tools are laid out on canvas to kill the clink of metal. Spanners, strap wrench, hand drill, soft brushes, stethoscope, wooden drift, grease pencil, fuse extractor. The sapper leans in, cup to ear, to listen for the insect rasp of a running clock. Veterans of the Blitz remember the first time they heard it, the sound turning bones to ice. Some recall the smell too, the sour mix of damp wood, cordite, and carbon dust. They sand away rust to expose the fuse ring. If there is a secondary anti-handling device, it must be tamed before the primary is touched. ZUS and anti-disturbance triggers have killed men for less. The sapper secures the casing with webbing and begins the slow turn. A quarter, then a half. Stop. Breathe. Feel for backlash. Chalk marks track progress around the thread. The team speaks in single words. Ready. Hold. Back. Time slips into a rhythm of nerves and muscle. When the ring yields, the fuse comes free into a waiting sandbag. No triumph. Only another problem. The explosive mass remains. A steaming rig is called forward, hoses snaked through the doorway, hot water coaxing Amatol to slump into waiting tubs. Hours pass. Cribbing is tightened. A joist groans and everyone freezes. Then the work resumes, steady as a pulse. Near dawn, the cellar is a maze of props and pipes. The bomb is a dark cylinder with its sting pulled. Chalk marks bloom across it like battle honors. The lorry backs up. The team lifts as one, webbing creaking, boards flexing. Outside, the city breathes again. On the ARP sheet, they write the time, the street, the lives return to ordinary. The door closes on an empty cellar and the day moves forward, one careful turn at a time. In the dead of night, the street holds its breath. A cratered doorway yawns open to a cellar where 1 ton of steel waits on rotten joists. The air smells of dust, cordite, and damp timber. Fire crews have pulled back. A small team steps forward beneath hooded lamps. Each boot fall measured, each word spoken low. The order is simple and terrifying. Remove the unexploded bomb and take it away. The casing is an SC-1000 known as Hermann. The nose is scarred, the tail is bent, and the fuse pocket sits where a bad touch could finish the job the Luftwaffe began. The engineer in charge notes the fuse pattern and the likelihood of a delayed train with anti-handling. No heroics. The render-safe attempt has failed earlier in the day. Now comes the lift. They shore the cellar first. Cribs and struts go up, wedges bite into brick. Sandbags become a cradle. A veteran sapper later remembered how the cellar seemed to grow smaller around the bomb as the team worked, and how the tick of a distant wall clock felt like a second heartbeat. They slide webbing beneath the casing using short pry bars and strips of canvas. Chalk marks map the balance point. A hand winch starts its slow music. The bomb rises a hand width, then another. Joists creak. Outside, a Bedford lorry waits with a timbered bed and a traveling cradle. The team moves like a single organism, guiding the mass along skids to the doorway, then into the blacked-out street. The lorry takes the weight. The convoy rolls toward the marshes, past shuttered shops and sleeping windows. At the bomb cemetery, a prepared pit gapes in the earth. The final transfer is deliberate and calm. Fuses are checked again. Earth goes in. A siren wails far off over London. The ground jumps once. The night exhales. They called it the bomb cemetery because nothing left it alive. At dawn, the convoy rolled past shuttered shops and cratered streets toward the edge of the city, tires whispering over cinders. The air had the sour tang of burned brick and wet ash. In the back of the lorry, the unexploded giant lay strapped under timber chocks, a dark cylinder scabbed with dirt, fins bent from impact. The sappers had marked it safe to move after the long night in the cellar, but nobody relaxed. Delay fuses were treacherous. Anti-handling traps were worse. Every pothole felt like a test. The range was a ripped patch of heath behind a low embankment. Wardens waved them into a bermed lane already scarred by other blasts. Sandbag walls, timber revetments, a control pit roofed with corrugated iron and earth. A sapper who had worked the Blitz since the first raid said he always listened for distant engines and for birds that refused to sing. He remembered the smell of cordite and damp canvas more vividly than any siren. They slid the bomb onto timber skids, eased it into a shallow scrape, and set the charges. Ammonal and canvas satchels, primer, detonators, firing cable paid out to the pit. The number 2 checked continuity with a hand exploder, then chalked the time and charge weight on a board. Across the heath, a thin mist hugged the ground. Somewhere a milk cart rattled. The city exhaled. Standby came from the pit, voices low and deliberate. The firing key turned. A pause that stretched like wire. Then the earth lifted and folded in on itself with a deep, blunt hammering. Soil rained down. A dark column rolled outward and lost its shape. When the wind cleared, a fresh crater yawned where the giant had lain. Edges sharp, sandbags shredded, timbers tossed like kindling. The sapper said the silence after was heavier than the noise. Another danger ended. Another lesson carried forward, and the convoy turned back toward a city still counting the hours. The first lesson from the Blitz is simple and hard-won. Time is the enemy, but patience saves lives. In the first weeks of mass raids, panic chased the wardens and the sappers. By winter, the city had learned a rhythm. Streets were cleared in minutes, cordons set, clocks started. The men in steel helmets arrived with crates of sand, timber for shoring, stethoscopes, and a plan refined after every near miss. Numbers tell the shape of those nights. Across London in 1940 and 1941, thousands of unexploded bombs were logged, sometimes hundreds in a single dark month. Failure rates varied by target and weather, but each misfired weapon meant a living threat under floorboards, in churchyards, beside tram lines. Render-safe timelines began at the first warden report and often ran for 12, 24, 36 hours or more, measured against a fuse that might wake without warning. Early in the Blitz, casualties among disposal teams were heavy. By spring, new drills, better intelligence on German fuses, and experience pushed survival upward. Veterans remembered the work through small details. A sapper feeling grit under a spanner and knowing the thread would hold. An ARP warden counting families at the rest center while listening to the distant thud of a controlled detonation. A lorry crew riding out to the bomb cemetery at the edge of the city with a load that hummed through the planks. The final lesson is in the ledger. Each UXB lifted meant a street reopened, a water main reconnected, a night of sleep returned to a block. The arithmetic of the Blitz was brutal, but every hour mastered and every procedure improved turned raw fear into saved lives.